여러분 좋은 아침입니다. 반갑습니다. 오늘 사회
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ji-Soo Lee. I'm a researcher at Koti Korea Transport Institute. I'm in charge of international relations at the Global Transport Cooperation Center. I would like to thank you for coming in spite of your very busy schedules. We will be discussing sustainable mobility in Asia during this session. So before we begin, I would like to invite Mr. Jae-hak-oh, President of Koti, for his opening remarks. Let's welcome him with a big hand.
My name is Jae-hak-oh, President of Koti. Thank you for joining us despite being very early in the morning. Welcome. I was not very used to this kind of setting, and I know there are some of you joining us through the YouTube live streaming, and we will be also video recording this session for you to see later. We are used to seeing many audience on site with rooms filled with people. So it seems that we're lacking some elements to the conference, but nonetheless, I would like to thank you all for coming. And today we're gathered to discuss on the topic of sustainable mobility in Asia. And today we have the Global Korea Convention 2021. It's a pleasure to be in such an event. Today, we are talking about sustainable mobility in Asia. And we asked the question, what is the mobility or sustainable mobility in Asia? What that would be about. It should be environmental friendly, and it should be convenient to each and every users. And that's the kind of direction that we want to head toward to. And when you look at the Asia region and compare it to Europe, Korea, and in Japan, Asia has somewhat different and unique mobility situation, and that is something that we want to discuss and to hear about in this session. Having said that, when you look at Asia, there are still a lot of different mode of mobility, like the motorcycles, and we don't see a robust public transportation system being established, but there are very individualized transportation system in each of the country. And it is important to make that sustainable and environmentally friendly going forward so that it can develop into that environmental friendly and sustainable personal mobility. That is something we would like to discuss, and that's something we would like to ask our presenters and panelists to talk about. We have two presenters today. One is on the e-mobility development in the Asian region, and we are joined by Dr. Hoon-gi Lee of Koti to present on that. And Korail will talk about the cooperation and development plan for a Korean railway in developing cooperation plan for Korea and ASEAN, and to develop future vision for Korail. And we'll invite Mr. Park Do-ho from Korail. And in Glasgow, we had a discussion on climate change under COP26. And there has been a lot of discussion on how to reduce greenhouse gas emission. And a lot of focus has been on the transportation sector. There are many levers we can use, but one of the key topics was on electrification. And another topic was to promote public transportation system. And there, what is critical is railway, because railway is known to be an environmentally friendly transportation. So we look forward to the presentation by Korail in this session. I believe this is the most important policy going forward, because when you look at fossil fuels like gasoline, diesel, and LPG vehicles, or LNG vehicles, and we often face the issue of electrifying the existing combustion engines. And also, we also need to shift SOC investment into railway or railway transportation. So one is on demand management and another is on electrification. These are the two important topics that we need to look into. This is the direction that Korea is headed to, but Asia may be in different contexts and different situations. So it would be great if we can touch upon that topic as well in our session. With that, in Global Korea Convention 2021 is now having the COTI session organized by the Korea Transport Institute. And we want to contribute to developing cooperation with Asian countries in sustainable mobility. And we hope that this will serve as an opportunity to promote exchanges, because due to COVID-19, we were not able to meet each other. But once COVID is behind us, we hope to see more active cooperation to have face-to-face interaction. So with that, I would like to end my opening remark. This conference is organized by NRC and sponsored by COTI, and we will now begin the actual session for COTI on sustainable mobility.
Yes, thank you very much for those remarks. We will now have a photo session, and I would like to invite today's participants.
네, 그러면 이제 본격적으로
We will now begin today's event in earnest, and the first presentation will be made by Dr. Hoon-gi Lee, who is head of the Global Transport Cooperation Center at COTI. The title of his talk is E-Mobility Development in Asia. Let's welcome him with a big hand. Good morning. My name is Hoon-gi Lee from COTI, and I will be talking about e-mobility development in Asia. It is an honor for me to be giving this talk. In 2016, from 2016 to 2018, I had a chance to work at ADB. And I worked on a project for e-mobility, and I came back to Korea in year 2000, and I carried out a joint study with ADB, and I would like to share the results of this study with you today. And as for e-mobility in Asia, well, as President Oh has said, the situation in Asia is quite different from other nations in the West. So I would like to talk about these differences. And also, ADB carried out this research to decide priority and decide the countries and the type of vehicles that we should be electrifying first. So as you know well, Asia is showing very fast economic growth in the recent years. Accordingly, we are faced with environment-related issues and transport-related issues. And to solve these issues, we are discussing many countermeasures, and one would be e-mobility. So that is one solution to our problems. And this is what I would like to explain today. We have advanced nations, and they are working on their e-mobility programs. However, also in Asia, we need to have a serious discussion on implementing e-mobility in the region. So what type of method should we employ? And so I think we need to talk about relevant implications. And so today, what I would like to talk about, the data, the information, basically I received from the ADB. And 13 cities were selected. And we decide upon some scenarios. And we looked at the total cost of ownership of these e-vehicles. And we tried to come up with implications from this study. And the 13 cities were in Southeast Asia and Central Asia and also the Pacific region and also West Asia. And so we tried to include as many countries as possible, and we tried to consider the uniqueness of the countries and the cities. And we were trying to draw implications from this study. And so the data that we gathered included socioeconomic indicators and many different types of data that has to do with energy. And based on all of this data, if we were to employ e-mobility, what kind of impact can we expect? So that was the essence of the study. So first of all, I would like to cover some socioeconomic features. So the population size ranged from 15 million in Dhaka to 2.8 million in Suva. And also for per capita GDP, we had Malaysia, that's rather the country that is rather well off, to very poor cities. Also, some of the socioeconomic features include 2- and 3-wheelers that were dominant in Ho Chi Minh City and Jakarta and so forth. On the other hand, in South Asia, Central Asia and Pacific, we could see that the situation was quite similar to advanced nations, and their cities were rather passenger car dominant. Also, in these 13 cities, of course, there are greenhouse gas emissions. And if we take a look at that, we have Jakarta and Dhaka with a large population size, and we have much greenhouse gases emissions from these cities. Also, we have countries with many taxes or many old buses, and there were a great amount of greenhouse gas emissions from these cities because of the vehicle composition. So for these 13 cities, we gathered data that we needed to study e-mobility impact, and one would be the grid carbon factor. So what does this mean? So to produce 1 kilowatt of electricity, how much carbon do we have to emit? And of course, the energy mix of countries are different. And if countries use a lot of coal in order to do power generation, the grid carbon factor will be high. In the case of Nepal, they have hydro power generation. In that case, the grid carbon factor is close to 0.
팩터라고 하는 것이 전기차를
And so
영향이 크기 때문에
the grid carbon factor has a very big impact when we go for electric vehicles. So we took that into account. And also we looked at the fossil fuel types. So gasoline, diesel, or CNG. This can have an impact as well. So we looked at the different types of fuel that were used. Next would be the electric tariff and the cost of fossil fuel. And we had different scenarios, and we analyzed the impact of the different scenarios. So
대출에 관련된
we worked with ADB, and we came up with a model for CO2 emissions. And we came up with what we call the e-mobility impact analysis tool. And we have the number of vehicles, the vehicle composition, population information. So such basic information would be included. And we also have detailed information on the specific vehicles. And so we would get a result by utilizing this analysis tool. And also we looked at 3 impacts of e-mobility. First would be what happens to the CO2 emissions level.
또 한 가지는 기존
And then
전기차로 전환하기 전에
we have the
상황과
existing situation before e-mobility versus after bringing in e-mobility. And we wanted to do a comparison of the before and after situation.
더불어서 차량
So that would be the EV impact module. And also we have the third module, which is the finance module. So we want to compare the cost of using an internal combustion engine versus electric vehicles. And based on these models, we wanted to determine the impact by scenario and draw implications from the results.
저희가 그 시나리오로는
And as for the scenarios, we came up with 3-4 different types of scenarios. First has to do with the grid carbon factor. So if that were to change, what would happen? And nowadays, of course, the big buzzword would be the renewables. And when we use more renewables, then the grid carbon factor will be lower.
차를 장내 도입을 한데
Also, we looked at the share of the newly introduced EVs. Also, we considered subsidies for EVs. So we looked at when the purchase subsidy was 0 versus when it was some substantial amount. Also, we considered the increase of fossil fuel price and also reduction in the electricity tariffs.
그래서 이거는
And so on this slide, well, this is just an example,
인도네시아 도시
and this is a city in Indonesia.
CO2 배출량이
And we looked at what happens to the CO2 emissions. And of course, if we introduce more e-vehicles, you can see that the CO2 emission level goes down. Next, we looked at the impact of subsidy in the same city.
기존의 승용차 같은 경우
And with the existing passenger car, even if we provide a subsidy of 50%, well, compared to ICE, the price is higher with the electric vehicle. However, what is interesting is the following. For three-wheelers and also motorcycles, so two-wheelers and buses, you can see that if we provide subsidies, then compared to the internal combustion engines, the cost actually goes down. So in these vehicle types, if we were to provide subsidies, it would have a great impact. So that was an analysis of just one city. It was an example. And when we carry out analysis for all 13 cities, well, we were able to draw some results. So I would like to share that with you. So first of all, here This is having EV's market share up to 25%. If that were to happen, what would be the impact? Now, this is quite interesting because this is the impact on CO2 emission reduction. And if the grid carbon factor is lower, then the impact of reducing CO2 emissions is higher. So grid carbon factor is very, very important, and a transition to renewables is something that we must really work on very fast. And we have Ho Chi Minh City and Penang. If we compare the two, we have the grid carbon factor impact, and also these cities have many two-wheelers. And in such cities, you can see that if we provide electric motorcycles, then the impact is huge. So this is quite different from advanced nations. If we can bring about electrification of motorcycles, it would have a huge impact in these cities. And so, as you can see here, renewable energy is quite important, and this is the example of China. So, for buses, they have solar panel buses in China. And this is a program that is currently going on. So this is an idea that can be borrowed and applied to the Asian countries. And secondly, I would like to talk about the price of electricity and how that can have an impact. And so we have Ho Chi Minh City, Dhaka, Ulaanbaatar, and Kathmandu, and you can see that there is a big impact. So that's one thing. So different cities will have different impacts, and I listed the cities that will be impacted more than other cities. And also the vehicle type has a big impact as well, according to our analysis. So this is what is happening in Taiwan, and they have what is called Gogoro. And Gogoro brought in a battery swapping system, and the usage of these motorcycles went up by a lot after bringing in the battery swapping system. And this business in Taiwan is growing. And also in Vietnam, they have a similar program, and they have adopted the battery swapping system for motorcycles, and they're working on that business model right now. So I will get back to this topic later on. But in Vietnam, they brought in the battery swapping system and did not provide subsidies. And they compare the purchasing price and the maintenance price of motorcycles, and this total cost of ownership was actually lower when the battery swapping system was in place, even without subsidies. And thirdly, I would like to talk about the price of fossil fuel and how this can have an impact. So yes, we saw great results in Kathmandu and Ho Chi Minh City and Dhaka. And the vehicle types that have the most significant impact were the commercial vehicles, such as minibuses, buses, and trucks. And so when cities utilize a lot of these vehicle types, they were heavily impacted in a good way. And also, we looked at the impact of providing subsidies, and the impact is high on the following vehicles: 2, 3-wheelers, taxis, minibuses, and so forth. So, in conclusion, now we have Kathmandu and Ho Chi Minh City, Tbilisi, and Bishkek that had significant positive impact by going towards e-mobility. However, we have cities with many two-wheelers, and in these cities, the impact was higher. So, implications. We need to prioritize taxis, buses, and 3-wheelers. And also, we need to convert to renewable energy. And thirdly, two-wheelers are also important, and the business case is there for the two-wheelers. And so we should focus on these three options.
선진국과는 다르게
And
아시아 지역의
the countries in Asia are different from Western nations, and so I would like to give some suggestions and recommendations. First of all, we need to work out effective measures for two- and three-wheelers, and this program has to be different from Western countries. Secondly, we need to develop a customized e-mobility policy that fits the nation. And we have many e-vehicles in China, for example. So for other countries, we have to consider the population characteristic and also the vehicle composition and try to come up with a customized policy.
그다음에 세 번째
Third recommendation is that renewable energy and smart grid is a key element.
차의 보급이 높아지면 정
And many people worry that there will be a shortage of electricity once we have many EVs out there. However, we will have smart grids and smart charging, and we will be better utilize the electricity that we generate. So that's the general idea that we have. So that is why we have to give a lot of thought to the smart grid as well. And fourthly, well, in Korea, we are providing subsidies, and that is why EVs are becoming more popular. But this is not quite easy in developing nations, and we have to find ways to make EVs more popular even without handing out subsidies. And so we need to focus on smaller size, lower price, and also public usage. And these would be the strategies that fit the developing nations. And lastly, I would like to make the following suggestion. EVs sharing mobility should be emphasized. So in China and in Singapore, they have a sharing mobility program already in place. And so in other Asian nations, I believe that we can adopt sharing mobility of the EVs. And so this is my conclusion slide, and I would like to wrap up my presentation. So we need to pay more attention to the two-wheelers and three-wheelers, and we need to customize our policies, and we need to pay attention to renewable energy and smart grid, and also focus on smaller size vehicles, and seriously think about introducing sharing mobility. And so that was what I wanted to talk about, and that concludes my talk. Thank you very much.
감사합니다.
Yes, thank you very much.
행사를 위해 멀리서 발걸음해 주신 한
Next, we have with us Tuho Park, the Director of Passenger Planning from Korea. She'll be talking about the future vision of Korea and the way forward in collaboration between Korea and ASEAN countries.
예, 반갑습니다. 한국철도공사 여객사업.
Good morning. My name is Tuho Park, Director of Passenger Planning at Korea. It's an honor to be here today. And today I would like to talk about the future vision of Korea and also how we can cooperate and collaborate with ASEAN countries going forward. I have about 20 minutes. And
말씀드려보겠습니다.
first, I would like to talk about
한국철도 먼저 소개하겠습니다. 간략히
the
소개드리겠는데요.
future vision and how we can cooperate. And first is on the introduction on Korail. Korail has led the innovation and revolution in development of Korail.
1899년 9월 18일
The
경인철도가
railway was established in 1894, and the rail started operating in 1905. And Gyeongbu Line was established, followed by the Gyeongbu Expressway that connects the metropolitan area. We were able to become the fifth country to have the bullet train in Korea. And in 2005, we became Korail as we are today. So the Korail Railroad Corporation. But many elderly still call us the Korea Railroad Agency, remembering back to the old days. Honam Line was established in 2015, and Gangneung, the Eastern Line, was established in 2017. This year is a special year because we started operating KTX EUM in year 2021. This is our organization. We have the headquarters and we have regional offices. We have about over 30,000 people within our organization. And as a public agency or public corporation, we believe Korail is the only agency with this number of employees. Briefly, this is on our business status. We have about 646 stations across the country. Due to COVID-19, although it has slightly gone down, but our revenue last year was 4.4 trillion won. And we also have a mobile ticketing system, which is actually the world best class in providing a self-ticket issue. And we have about 81.4% of ticket issue through mobile, and we have the highest on-time traveling. And we have diverse business, transportation, as well as adjacent service and maintenance business. And we have express, general, and metropolitan and logistics business. And we also have transportation-related adjacent business, and we also have maintenance business. So these are some of the business that we provide. We do have subsidiaries within Korail. We have about 10,000 people within our subsidiaries. Within our station, we do promotion and sales and marketing, which is done by Korail Retail. And we also have Korail Tech, which issues train tickets and manages parking lots. And we have Korail Rogers, which manages logistics. And we have travel business, who provides overall tourism. And Korail Network subsidiary provides maintenance service to Korail. And now I would like to talk about the future vision of Korail. This year, we introduced Korail or KTX EUM. This is an EMU, electric multiple unit. Existing bullet train had different rolling stocks being connected. But starting with KTX EUM, we have a distributed power unit across the rolling stock. And we were able to build a low-carbon, environmentally friendly train. KTX EUM, the name was selected through the public contest, and it also has a vision of the Korail to become a global railway. Good afternoon. I am the first engine officer to operate the central line connecting Wonju and Jecheon. We are operating low-carbon, environmental friendly express train. It's an honor to operate the first train, and I will make sure we have a safe trip to our destination. KTX EUM is an electric multiple unit EMU train. It doesn't need a power car, so we can onboard more passengers, and we can do acceleration and deceleration in the short range. And we have installed the first 4G wireless network onto the rolling stock of KTX EUM. What is more encouraging is that we now have the express railway installed for our inner central line. The newly installed line has shifted the single line to a double line, which was installed 80 years ago. We have EMU 260, which has the multiple electric unit, and we can travel as fast as 250 kilometers per hour. This will be the backbone of the 21st century economy and our society, building green, digital, and regional New Deal. And this will lead the transformation of our day-to-day lives. KTX EUM, compared to passenger cars, has a sixth of carbon emission and consumes a 13th of energy consumption compared to car. It is an excellent, environmentally friendly, and low-carbon express train. Compared to existing multiple unit, we have power distribution in multiple unit cars to increase safety. Also, the wheelbase weight has been reduced to reduce maintenance costs significantly. The history of railway is filled with sad stories. During the Japanese rule, the modern military school was established by independent movement activist Sang Yong-lee, and his birthplace is in Andong area. And Im Cheong-gak, his house, was now restored to bypass the trailway, and it is meaningful that we have changed the railway to go around his house. And by 2025, we will be able to restore Imcheong Pavilion to its original state, thanks to the change of the rail track. We're going to overcome COVID-19 successfully and have our stations back so that our people can meet the loved ones in the station area. The government will do its best to return the new day-to-day life to Korean people who has protected and upheld hope during a very challenging time.
대통령님께서 좋은 말씀 많이 하셔서
We have heard from the president, and there were already many information shared. So I'm going to be very brief in summarizing what KTX EUM is. We have a very spacious car, and we have a window per passenger. There is a mobile charging station with USB ports, and there are a lot of convenient features on board KTX EUM. This is the future that we are envisioning. We want to expand environmentally friendly transportation, and we want to enhance the share of railroad in transportation to reduce greenhouse gas emission and traffic accident. And by doing so, we want to contribute to the balanced development of the country. We put convenience and safety of our people first, and we want to become the growth engine of our country in the future. So we want to go overseas and invest in infrastructure to commercialize key technologies.
또한 그
Also,
소수 중심의 생활권 확대와
we want to expand the operation and share of express rail, and we are now trying to build a train operation pattern depending on the demand, and we want to reduce travel time, and we have
상당히 호응이 좋고요.
the transportation station established in east of Daegu, and we're going to build hybrid stations throughout the countries where train becomes the center of connecting different transportation mode, and we want to build this kind of transportation hub across the country. We also want to introduce new trains, which is low cost and high efficiency, and we want to promote non-face-to-face service, Korean Talk, and automatic ticket issue, and service call by our staff will be continuously provided to our users. When you look at this map, when you look at the current share of express train, it's 46%. Going forward, we want to increase this share by 60%. When you look at our Central Line and Gangneung Line, the semi-express railways share is 5%. But once we have completed the third national railways network, this share will be increased to 25%. If the express train user expands to nationwide, we believe we are able to build travel across the country, which just takes half a day. We're going to open Pubal-Chungju connection line as a first phase connection. And in the second phase, we will be able to connect until Mungyong. This will complete the inner travel line for express line. This will be completed end of next year. In 2023, the central line is connected to Cheongnam to Andong, but this will be extended to Pujeon, which is close to Busan area. And from Pujeon, we will connect to Suncheon, and from Songsan to Hongsan, and we have the West Sea line that will be completed. The full completion will be done in 2024. With full completion, we'll be able to connect fully from Taeguk to Iksan, completing the West Sea line. And starting 2025, we will have a direct connection from Suwon to Incheon. And from Suwon, we can reach Busan, which is the southern eastern part of Korea. And we can also travel from Incheon to Honam Line and Gyeongbu Line, which is connecting both southern east and southern west line of Korea. Especially in 2028, we will be completing double line for Pyeongtaek-Osan. Currently, it's a single line, which is limiting its capacity. But starting 2028, once we have a double line in Pyeongtaek and Osan, we will have enough line, and we will overcome ticket shortage issue. Last weekend, from Friday to Sunday, it was difficult to get tickets for KTX, and many of the tickets were sold out. But once we have a double line, that issue will be solved. Currently, we have KTX-1, which was completed in 2008, and in 2010 we introduced KTX Sancheon. And currently, we have EMU 220, which is being developed by Road Team. This will be completed partially and introduced partially in 2023. But by 2033, we will be able to complete EMU 370. The 2004 KTX-1 will come to end of its useful life. So by then, we'll be able to introduce EMU 370. And Sancheon, its useful life will be completed or end in 2040. So we are reviewing to introduce EMU 400 by that time. Pyeongtaek-Osan double line is being constructed with target speed of 770 km per hour. With 370 km per hour train being introduced, we can have this train travel in Gyeongbu Line. The semi-express line is currently in operation, which is a KTX EUM, and this will be expanded going forward. For general railway, we have Mugunghwa Rail and Sema Rail. And by 2023, all these trains will come to end of its life. And this train will go down in history. And we used to have unification Tongil Line and Bidulgi Line, and as such, as we have seen in these two previous cases, Mugunghwa and Sema train will be no longer operated. And Sema line is already excluded from the current operation, and it will be replaced by EMU 150. It has 150 km per hour speed, and this will be newly introduced in 2023.
저희들 철도의 안전이 가장 중요하기
Safety is the utmost priority for train, and we do invest heavily in safety of our train. And up until 2018, we spent about 3.1 trillion won, and our plan is to increase that to 8.7 trillion won until 2023. That means we have 2.8 times increase in investment when it comes to safety issues. So safety will be an utmost priority for railway transportation. Once we do invest into it, we will see reduced accident of our trains. Currently, there has been about 27% reduction in accident rate.
마지막 세트로 그
This is my last section,
방향에 대해서
which is on the cooperation direction for Korea ASEAN countries. We do have an overseas offices in France, China, and Russia.
지사를 통해서
And through our overseas offices, we are carrying out international exchanges and also contributing, enhancing our global competitiveness. We also work with International Union of Railway, UIC, and also Organization for Cooperation of Railways, OSJD. We have dispatched our employees there, and we also have overseas business in Tanzania and the Philippines. We are creating revenue in new business, and we're also disseminating operation and technology know-how of Korail to these countries. We are the statutory member of OSJD. OSJD has about 28 countries in Central Asia.
대륙철도운행에 필요한 지역을 총괄하는 기구입니다.
This organization oversees the regulation and rules governing Eurasia Continent Railway, and we are jointly pursuing joint working group activities, and we're building international foundation to link Eurasia railway network that goes beyond inter-Korean railway. At Korail, we have the
연수 기간은 2007년도에 지금
Railway Training Institution
기관과
certified by UIC, and this is the only institution in Asia, and we are supporting network development and
53개국의
also new overseas business. And we have about 85 programs in 53 countries, and the programs are in the areas of operation, technology, and general services in railway. These are completed projects. So we have a project completed in Vietnam, Myanmar, and Iran. And currently, ongoing business is in the Philippines, Myanmar, and Mongolia. The details will be
지금 필리핀 마닐라에
in the annex pages. And this is the operation and consulting business that we are doing in the Philippines. We're working together with Hyundai Lotem alongside with Korean companies, and we're building this with the local Philippine companies. San Miguel is the project owner, and we have a multinational team going into the construction. So we are continuously building trust with local companies and different stakeholders. And in the respective area of railway, we are carrying out cooperation to build win-win partnership model for all stakeholders. We are exporting the Korean train technology and operation know-how overseas with this kind of cooperation and partnerships. And we want to go beyond Asia to reach the global market. Currently, we are in Tanzania of Africa to provide supervision to existing construction project. We have a joint venture company comprised of multinational companies to provide supervisory and design review for system and other relevant equipment. And with that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you for listening.
네, 처장님.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you for such a great presentation. And through this transformation session, we were able to hear about the Asia's e-mobility development from Dr. Lee, and we also heard from Korea on the vision of Korea development. We will now go into panel discussion. Before introducing our panelists, I regret to announce that Mr. Samatis Kotuzas from World Bank is unable to join us for this session. For our panel discussion, Professor Sang-ho Chu will be the chair of our panel discussion. I would like to invite our panelists onto the stage. And to introduce our panelists, we have with us Mr. Chang Sung-jang of GGGI, who is the lead in transport and sustainable mobility. We also have from Korea Exim Bank, we have Director Song Yong-um, and last but not least, we have Mr. Sang Pil-go, Senior Researcher with Korea Research Institute. With that, I would like to invite our panelists.
안녕하십니까.
Good morning. Sustainable Mobility in Asia is our session, and I'm the chair of today's panelist session. My name is Sang-ho Chu of Hongik University.
교통 세션에
It's an honor for me to be in the
오늘 토론하실 분은 아까
COTI session in
소개를 해드려서
Global Korea Conventions. I'm going to skip introduction of our panelists because it was already introduced by our moderator. We have with us a total of 3 panelists,
추가적인 시사점 부분에 대해서
and we will carry out panel discussion regarding the implication of the presentation that was carried out. The first panelist is Mr. Chang Son-chang of GGGI, followed by Mr. Song Yong-um of Korea Exim Bank. And last but not least, we have with us Mr. Sang Pil-go, Senior Researcher of KARI, Korea Railroad Research Institute. Each panelist, because we only have 3 panelists now, we have about up to 8 minutes for each of the panelists. And if there is remaining time, we will be able to accommodate some questions from the floor or through the YouTube channel. With that, I would like to invite Mr. Chang Son-jang for his discussion.
네, 안녕하세요.
Good morning.
소개를 맡은 장창선 책임
My name is Chang Son-chang, as was introduced, and I am from GGGI. And some may be familiar with this institute, some may not. So we were established in year 2010. We are an international organization, and we were established for the development and sustainability of developing nations. And we focus on 6 areas.
에너지,
So energy, waste, gender,
산림,
forestry, and one other area would be the area of transport. And I really enjoyed the presentation by Hoon-gi Lee. And in the area of transport, we try to vitalize public transportation and also the dissemination of EVs. So today I would like to talk about the role of GGGI when it comes to e-mobility and transport. And I would like to talk about how we can cooperate with COTI and other institutes. Of course, we have a representative from Exim Bank here. So I hope that we can have a discussion on finding new projects to work on.
그래서 저의 이름은 장창선이고요.
Okay, so my name is Chang-sun Chang, and I would like to talk about transportation first. So I'm sure you're familiar with this. The transport sector has contributed to about 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And as President Oh has talked about, at COP26, there were discussions on how we can reduce carbon emissions. And different countries are working on this, and they submitted NDCs. And in these NDCs, 80% of the countries included transport in their NDCs. So all nations feel that we really need to work on our transport sector. And we have 41 countries that are a member of GGGI. And when we did an analysis of them, we could see that 80% of these members include transport in their NDCs. Well, what about e-mobility? Many people, many policymakers, many countries feel the need for e-mobility. However, only about 30 to 40% of the countries have established targets for e-mobility. And we have different countries and governments, so that would be the public sector. And discussions on e-mobility are not just with the public sector. We can see that all players in the private sector are talking about e-mobility, and we expect EVs to increase to 41 million by 2040, and these are for passenger cars. So 35% of passenger cars would be EVs by 2040, and we have Tesla and BMW, for example. All the car OEMs have established targets for e-mobility. So they have a certain number by the year 2030 or 2040, for example. So taking all that into consideration, e-mobility is not just a market, it is a mega trend.
그럼 이제 이모빌리티한 메가 트렌드에서는
So regarding this mega trend of e-mobility, well, what is GGGI doing? We survey the demand from our members, and we come up with the relevant policies, the projects and programs, and come up with specific projects. And of course, we make the link to the financing institutes and so forth. And so e-mobility has been adopted in Korea as well. However, there are many, many challenges. And in the case of developing nations, there are lack of resources, for example. And in that case, well, these nations feel the need for e-mobility, but they are at a loss as to how to specifically implement and bring in e-mobility in their countries. So everything is moving at a very slow pace. And what we started to do was to come up with 3 different strategies. One is linking e-mobility solutions to the existing transport infrastructure. So one example would be BRT, or bus designated lane. And we want to link e-mobility to BRT. Or we can work with the existing ITS, or the intelligent transport system, so that e-vehicles can be brought in a very effective and efficient way. The second strategy that we have is to come up with projects. So EVs are eco-friendly. So we design a ecotourism project, for example.
마지막에는
And the third strategy is the following. The public sector may be in the lead, but we do need the private sector to play very important roles. And so strategy C is facilitating the adoption of e-mobility in the private sector. and to work on financial framework establishments.
첫 번째 타입으로 했을 때는
And so this is the first type, type A, and this is what we did in Ethiopia.
BRT B2 라인
And to the BRT B2 line, we carried out a feasibility study on bringing in e-mobility here. And Exim Bank
승인을 해주셨습니다.
has approved more legs of the BRT system in order to employ e-mobility. So here, this is the project in Sri Lanka, and we're utilizing the ITS. And in Laos, we utilize BRT. I think time is limited, so I think I have to move fast. This is strategy B, and this is Angkor Wat in Cambodia, and also Pokhara City in Nepal. And this is Cambodia, and we also have Jordan. So we have Petra UNESCO World Heritage Site in Jordan, for example, and we work with Jeff or these other numerous international organizations. And this is the C type among our three strategies, and this has to do with the financial framework. And we will be providing funds to these developing nations at very low interest rates. And this is something that we worked on in the Philippines, and you can look at the partnership program that we have. And so in e-mobility, we are carrying out numerous projects with 17 countries, and we're being very strategic about it. So should we work on project design first? Should we work on policy first? Or should we work on finance first? So through numerous consultative sessions, we provide support. And also, Dr. Hoon-gi Lee of Coty, scholars like him are coming up with models to decide which country or which area to prioritize on. And so that was my short presentation. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. So Mr. Chang has talked about the fact that GGGI is making many efforts in order to expand e-mobility, and there is international cooperation in order to apply numerous strategies of bringing in e-mobility in developing nations. And as for e-mobility expansion, I think it is a global trend. And in that sense, I believe that the role of GGGI is very, very important. So thank you very much for those remarks.
Next, we have Mr. Song Young from the Korean Exim Bank. He is a manager with the Economic Cooperation Business Unit. Good morning. I am the general manager of Economic Cooperation Business Unit under Korea Exim Bank. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak at such a renowned venue. Many know about Korea Exim Bank, but within Korea Exim Bank, we have three main business. We divided by different groups. The Exim Bank that you know of is largely around ASEAN, which is to support export cooperation in Korea. And we also, many know us in providing aid to other countries. When we talked about the railway, in the previous presentation, we heard about Gyeongbu Line and other railroad line across Korea. So when we had our first railway installed, we did receive many loans from other countries. And Korea Exim Bank also provides loan to other countries, and that fund is named Overseas Economic Cooperation Fund, and that fund management is done under my team, which is the Economic Cooperation Business Unit. We also have Inter-Korean Cooperation Fund under our team Today, the focus of my talk and the focus of this session is on mobility, e-mobility, as well as railroad project. And we provide a loan to these kind of projects as well as SOC or infrastructure related projects. Starting last year, we are facing the risk of COVID-19, and due to this pandemic, the economic cooperation, and providing these different types of project is facing many challenges. From the standpoint of developing countries, we have to carry out a lot of feasibility studies and economic analysis. And in order to do that kind of analysis, we need experts and professionals to participate to carry out that kind of feasibility test. And within our team, EDC, we saw this situation as a contingent situation, and we came up with contingent program to provide aid and assistance. And the biggest issue under EDCF, our fund, is about what we should do after COVID-19. How are we going to lead economic cooperation after COVID-19? And that is something I would like to briefly introduce through my discussion. And once I introduce this new post-COVID program, I believe that many implications will be drawn to railway area as well as in e-mobility area. In order to do infrastructure, we need to do a lot of exchanges. But the current situation does not allow us to carry out that kind of exchanges and interaction. In order to respond to this pandemic, many countries are spending much budget on responding to pandemic and to responding to health crisis. So going forward, we would like to do or provide loan to different countries in carrying out their programs. For instance, in the areas of transportation area, we can provide loan to allow these countries to provide subsidies and to buy devices and equipment. So this is something that we can also provide so that these countries can provide aid and subsidy for programs. And in post-COVID area, we want to focus on green and environmental friendly program, and also we want to enhance digital program, as well as we want to enhance healthcare related EDCF program. We don't just want to go into one single theme or one single business, but we want to also invite private sector and Korean companies in working with developing countries. And this program will not just provide installation and construction, but also it could go well into operation of that project, especially in the green area. In 2020, we approved about $2 billion last year. By 2025, we want to increase that number from $2 to $6 billion in providing EDCF fund. And for green EDCF, we also want to introduce climate risk management so that we can manage and abate risk from climate change. And when it comes to digital EDCF, we have smart cities and e-government programs. But in addition to that, we also want to include railway so that we can introduce smart management system for railway. That could also be part of digital EDCF. For digital EDCF, we had about $300 million but we want to increase that to
마지막으로 보건 분야는 작년 4억 불 정도 승인을 했지만 2025년
another 300. And for digital, we also want to include increase the fund from 400 to $1 billion. Last year, we approved about 2 trillion EDCF fund alone last year. The Korean government in 2019
키운다는 그런 전략적 목표를
we have a goal to increase that fund by threefold by 2025 from what it was in 2019. So, for instance, if we did 2 trillion in 2019, we believe that in 2030 we'll be approving up to $6 trillion in 2030. And I believe that transportation sector is an area where we have supported the most. But going forward, it is more likely that we will support
저희 사업 특히
more fund into the transportation sector. As we have heard from the presentations, railway and e-mobility area
그렇지 않아도
are
인도네시아에도 지금
the sector that we want to focus on, and our strategy is that, for instance, in Indonesia, Hyundai Kia Motors is building a factory in Indonesia at the moment. The car that will be produced will be largely electric cars, EVs. So
정부 앞으로 향후에
in our EDCF fund, we want to support Indonesian government in providing EVs, and we want to provide program aid to Indonesian government this year to proliferate electric vehicles within Indonesia. So the program aid is about, or program loan is to
필요가 있을 텐데
is to support policy. But once the policy and regulation is in place, there will be infrastructure construction and infrastructure building. So we want to further support this infrastructure build-up next year and the year that follows through EDCF. And we also want to expand into operation of those infrastructure if need be. Of course, that is something that will be and should be carried out by the private sector, not the public sector. So we may need a lot of cooperation with the private sector in the process. When we actually build the actual policy and regulations, Korea Exim Bank is a financing entity. We do not do operation and actual business. So we hope that COTI can provide that kind of advisory in how we can operate and develop our strategy.
공공에서의 인프라 사업이 민간으로
And once we can work effectively together, we believe we will be able to expand the benefit of these businesses from public sector to private sectors.
스터디를 할 때
And when we do feasibility study,
포함해서 저희가 지금
going forward on our program loans,
전문 연구기관들이
we can work with COTI, and you have about 17 expert institutions in doing that kind of research. When we do feasibility study, we
전문 연구기관에 다 보내드릴 예정입니다.
are going to send out the notification of feasibility study to all 17 research institutions and expert institutions. So maybe you can review the feasibility study request and let us know the kind of support that you can provide. So maybe we can do a joint feasibility study with the 17 institutions, and when need be, because we're providing the financing loan,
개도국하고 협력을 해줄
you can probably work with the developing countries in form of a grant. And I believe that will make our infrastructure projects more sustainable. So this session is actually very timely, but going forward, we would like to work further with the relevant institutions. With that, I'd like to end my discussion.
네, 엄성영 부장님 토론 감사드립니다.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Ahn. So at Exim Bank,
인프라 협력 프로그램으로
they are working on different programs, but in the past they worked on separate small-scale programs, but I think now they have a more comprehensive program. And he has talked about support in 4 different areas, so green and climate, digital, healthcare are all included. And also there is investment development in order to bring about more investment by the private sector. And also people at Exim Bank are considering what will happen in the post-COVID-19 era. And so we're discussing the railway business and also e-mobility. And I believe that there will be more loans to the Asian nations for these projects. So I believe that Exim Bank will play a more important role and expand their business further. And the last discussant is Mr. Sang-pil-go from KRRI.
Nice to meet you. My name is Sang-pil-go. Thank you for this invitation, and I would like to thank our presenters for their wonderful presentation. Our research institute has done studies in e-mobility within our institution, and we've also carried out e-mobility in Vietnam, which was done last year. But I guess today's invitation was done because you wanted to hear about cooperation opportunities in railroad area. So I'm going to focus my discussion on international cooperation in the railway sector. Korail's overseas strategy and its timeline and its opportunities and approaches is something that I would like to touch upon. When it comes to strategy, one of the main agenda of GKC 2021 is sustainability. And sustainability is about mainly 3 pillars. One is environment, another is society, and another is economic sustainability. Railway is environmentally sustainable, like Mr. Oh has mentioned. So this is something that I'm not going to dwell into, but we want to continue on that sustainability when it comes to overseas projects. The overseas projects for railway is what we usually do, and a lot of people think about north-south railway, and the inter-Korean railway is quite different from overseas railway. And inter-Korean railway is something that we can actually do physically, connecting these railway tracks. So we have developed strategy from early on, and we do have a favorable environment where we can connect the 2 Koreas. But when it comes to Southeast Asian countries cooperation, many of these countries are island countries, and we cannot connect our railway with these countries. There are many different ways to invest, like the direct investment and indirect investment. And as we have heard, the Korea's investment is indirect investment, as we have heard from Mr. Park. The Philippines project has gone even beyond that, so we've made quite a progress, but we're doing interaction and consulting and supervisory service. So this is actually far from a direct investment into the country. So it's rather sporadic, and sometimes it's a one-time project. But we want to go beyond that. And I think it's time for us to change our strategy. But we have been doing a lot of consulting and supervisioning and indirect investment. So the way forward would be to do direct investment. When it comes to direct investment, it's about getting equity ownership or to get rights to operation. One example would be Genesis Wyoming Company, GNW. And Genesis Wyoming has about train operation right in 20 countries. It's not just an indirect investment. They actually purchased the operation right and leased that operation right and own that for 20 to 30 years. And they actually dispatch their own employees to these different markets. When we benchmark this company, I mean, there are many railway companies that are suffering financially from deficit, especially for cargo train operation. So maybe we can acquire and work with these companies. This is about getting the experience. Korea and domestic train companies or railway companies have never had overseas experience. We've done consulting projects, but this was just emanating our know-how. But we've never had this field experience in going abroad and doing operation in overseas markets. So we need to start building that hands-on experience from overseas. Korail is the leading Korean railroad company, but in terms of readiness, we are not ready to do overseas business yet because we do have change of leadership frequently, and whenever there's a change of leadership, the viewpoint on looking and seeing how the overseas investment should be done also changes accordingly. This is also in line with a change in government administration. So as you have seen in the org chart, the organization for overseas railway business is not big enough. It's subscaled. It's not to blame Korail, but it's of course natural to invest more human resources and investment into a profit-generating business, which is the domestic business. So going over to the timeline. So we need to shift to direct investment from indirect business, and the reason and rationale for that is because we also heard from Korail on the future vision, but it's good to expand railway network, but our population cannot grow forever. So when you look at Korea alone, when it comes to passenger business and passenger business revenue, I don't believe that expanding the railway network will bring us increase in revenue going forward in Korea. And in terms of timely, we have this competition from China. Whenever we do overseas business, the Chinese railway company is our key competitors. 10 years ago, there was about 20 railway companies in global 100 companies. Now, out of this 20, there's only 3. One is Chinese Railway Group, and Deutsche Bahn from Germany, and a French company is in that top 3 list. And for the first time in history, the Chinese Railway Group is now in the top 20 list. They have more revenue than the German and French company combined. They have acquired other domestic railway companies within China, so they are now in all types of business. They're an all-around player when it comes to railway. So they are the very competent competitors. But Chinese Railway Group is not much interested in overseas business like the Wyoming case in the U.S. So they're not that aggressive in overseas business, and I think this is an opportunity for Korea to go into overseas business. The window of opportunity is now open, but it's closing very fast. We need to leverage this opportunity to the fullest to acquire the operation right of overseas railway operation. If we miss this timing, our opportunity will of course shrink going forward. Once again, if I may summarize, this is not something that Korail can do on its own. We need the government support. And when it comes to government support, we need the financing. The Genesis Wyoming in 2019
싱가포르 국부펀드죠. GIC 국부펀드에 사실 인수가 됐습니다.
was acquired by GCI of Singapore. And Singapore's GCI is a
원에 사실
state
사례를 봤을 때
fund in Singapore.
어느 정도 자금의 능력, 자금의 지원을
So we do need a large financing capacity when it comes to overseas business.
그냥 알아서 하는.
So you cannot leave this just up to the Korail or SR or Hyundai Lotem. We need a very strong government support when it comes to overseas railway business is in terms of financing and funding.
프로젝트 수준이 아니고
This is not just one-time project level, but this is about acquiring a company's operation right. So the scale is actually bigger than
또는 제안에 대해서
company level. In terms of approach, what I want to recommend is
주요 이제
when it comes to railway business, a lot of the investment
저희 방식인데 리스 방식인데 BTL 방식
is in form of BTL, build, transfer, and lease. And when the decision is made around BTL, it's largely around different stakeholders. Different stakeholders have different factors at play. For instance, private sector players look at NPV, they look at net present value to see feasibility. And when you look at the creditor side, for instance, the Korea Exim Bank or KDB, they look at the loan maturity and whether their ability to pay back loan is there.
전체 이제
And when it look at the key owners, they look at the total life cycle cost, LCC, and they look at whether the life cycle cost is low or not. So the way they evaluate project feasibility is different, and it boils down to risk management. Because of this, in Korea,
민간 투자 사업 리스크를 평가할 때
when we evaluate risk for private sector business, we follow and benchmark the Japanese method. It was imported from the UK. But the difference with the Japanese risk management model is that Japan
인식이 이렇게 높지 않은 경우를
did not have such a high awareness on risk, unlike the UK model.
차지하지 않았습니다.
So the risk did not take up such a big portion of its feasibility criteria.
달라졌지만 이제
So although it has changed over time, when it comes to investment decisions, we have to reconsider and think about how we measure risk and assess risk. So what we need to do and
투자 의사
consider is
value for money를 체크하는 방식.
we have to go beyond checking the value for money, which was the approach imported from Japan, but we also need to have a
문제는 사실 저희
reconsideration of how we view risk. In the past, we had government
원래
to
PPP가
do most of the risk taking.
근본적인
But when it comes to PPP, the key objective of PPP
왜냐하면 사업자는 전문
was to have risk taken by the private sector, and we have to manage risk well. And by taking that risk, they get high risk, high return.
진행을 해와
That was the practice.
이제 그런 방식으로 인해서 리스크를 민간 사업자가 떠날
That is the ideal approach, but that has not been the practice to date. So, in going forward, we need to have more of the risk taken by the private sector. And when it comes to railway project going overseas, risk management is the key.
내 역량
And when it comes to risk management, we have to assess the capability of Korail, and we also need to look at risk management capability of Exim Bank and benchmark that so that we can reflect that in risk management.
네, 구상필 선임연구원님.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Koo, for those remarks.
보다 그 직접적인 전략 부분을 좀
And so I think you have talked about some very practical and direct strategies. So in terms of international cooperation in the railroad sector, we have to engage in direct investment. And so we will be able to get concession rights. And of course, you talked about the example of Genesis Wyoming in the U.S. And so we need this type of model in investing. And also, you have talked about the emergence of the Chinese railway related entities. And so perhaps we need to act preemptively to deal with that. And lastly, Mr. Koo, you talked about how the private sector should shoulder more of the burden and, of course, be rewarded with the coordinating profits. And we need to think about how we evaluate our ODA programs. And so thank you. So we heard from three discussants, and I believe that the basic pillar or the common thread had to do with sustainability, and there was an introduction of numerous strategies based on sustainability. Now we have about 1 minute left, so President Oh, maybe you would like to give some wrapping up remarks?
됐어. 여기서 할게. 괜찮아. 우리 추성화 교수님.
Yes, Professor Chu, thank you very much for giving me this chance. Now, time is very limited. Time was very limited for the panel discussion, and I would like to thank all of you for your valuable input. And, of course, we are holding the Global Korea Convention, and actually we have three major organizations that have hosted this event. We have the NRC, and we also have Exim Bank, and also we have KOICA. So KOICA focuses on ODA projects, and Exim Bank works on the finance aspect and carries out loan business. And these three organizations came together to host Global Korea Convention. And I believe the underlying message is that different entities have to converge and come together to see results in the current age and times. And of course, we are faced with numerous challenges such as climate change and the pandemic, of course. And so what can we do as an international society? As for mobility and the railroad sector, I believe that these areas are directly related to climate change and global warming. And when it comes to mobility, well, there is a very fast transition to e-mobility. And of course, we heard from Dr. Hoon-gi Lee on that. And we have the fourth industrial revolution. We're going towards net zero carbon neutrality and so forth. And everything is moving very, very fast. And I believe that international cooperation has to change, and we have to reinvent ourselves accordingly and adjust to the changes. And of course, this has been discussed a lot in many other conferences as well. And Korea is known for its ODA programs, and we have to think of coming up with win-win models of providing ODA. And we have to keep up with the times, and we have to review what we have been doing. And in the future, we will be expanding our ODA programs, both in size and in quality. And we do want to become a leading nation when it comes to ODA. So I believe that we need some more in-depth discussions on how to do that. And we have Korail and Coty and GGGI and Exim Bank. We have very important institutions participating in this session. So I hope that our relationship will not end with this conference, but that we can meet in future sessions and other settings and continue our dialogue and efforts. So once again, I would like to thank all of you for your contribution. Yes, President Oh, thank you very much for those kind remarks. And so I think it is now time to wrap up. We discussed the topic of sustainability and the important topic of e-mobility when we are heavily influenced by climate change and the pandemic. So I would like to thank those of you who attended via YouTube. Thank you very much for attending till the very end. I would like to thank the 2 presenters and the 3 panelists for your contributions. So on that note, I would like to close this session on sustainable mobility in